Have Kevin come in. Don't forget to unmute, Kevin.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentle drunks. My name is Kevin Olson. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Very pleased to be here. I want to welcome you all to the Fourth Dimension. Big book study, that is. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming. I'm certainly glad you're here. I know I'm certainly glad I'm here. I need to be here as much as any of us. As we always do, we will start with the set-aside prayer, which goes a little something like this. God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about you, about me, about my fellow man, and the 12 steps. And please allow me to gain a fresh new vision, perspective, and understanding of what you, what me, what my fellow man, and the 12 steps are all about. Amen. Amen. And as this is the Fourth Dimension Big Book study, I always like to read the two parts of our book that refer to the fourth dimension. So first of all, on page 8, Bill Wilson writes, I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And then on page 25, Bill Wilson writes that we have found much of heaven and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. We're going to be catapulted. We're going to be rocketed into the fourth dimension. And for everyone who will, for the sake of tradition, everybody please put one hand up like this. I know you remember Maribel. I know you remember. It's nice to see you. Everybody put another hand up like this. And everybody go, oh yeah. Even Luda's in on it today. Attaboy, Luda! Luda! Okay, guys, I'm going to have fun tonight. I hope y'all are going to have fun tonight. It's totally optional, but highly recommended. We are not a glum lot. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. I absolutely insist on enjoying life. So let's have some fun tonight. We're just for the sake of really review, what I want to do is just talk about some foundational stuff. We're going to talk about the cycle again. My hope is that some of you will share a couple of cycle stories, one or two. And then tonight, primarily, the focus tonight is going to be taking a look at a guy who had this problem, a guy who has the problem of alcoholism, a guy by the name of Bill Wilson, our co-founder. So we're going to be reading Bill's story tonight, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So first of all, foundationally, at the very foundation of this study, okay, is something that I've learned. Chuck Chamberlain talks about transition that I need to make as an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need to make a transition from being a taker to being a giver, okay? I need to make that transition from taking to giving, from selfishness to selflessness, from self-centeredness to God-centeredness. Okay, from self-centeredness to humility, from being a taker to being a giver. So if you're here tonight and you're new, relatively new to AA, I'm glad you're here. Welcome to AA. And you can be a taker tonight for about the next 15 minutes. And then we're gonna insist that you start making your way towards that giver side of the equation. Okay. So that said, let's take a look as well at what Joe and Charlie in the Joe and Charlie Big Book Study series talk about, the 3 things that every alcoholic needs to know in order to achieve recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need to know what my problem is. I need to know what the solution is, and I need a program of action that I can do to achieve the solution to overcome the problem. Problem, as it's outlined in the forward to the second edition of our book, is just characterized as the grave nature of alcoholism. That's what they call it, the grave nature of alcoholism. We get that from Dr. Silkworth. We talked about that at length over the last couple of weeks. We're gonna touch on the cycle of alcoholism again that we get from page XXVIII in the doctor's opinion. And my hope is that some of you will share some of your cycle stories. I'm going to share another one of my own, and then maybe we'll get a couple of more of you to share yours, just so we can start to really familiarize with ourselves with what they sound like and kind of the process there. And we're going to talk about the problem a lot tonight. Okay. Now, the solution to alcoholism, we learn, we get from Dr. Carl Jung, is what is characterized as a vital spiritual experience. And on page 26, in particular, in the chapter, there is a solution. We see the moment that Carl Jung gives the solution to a guy named Roland Hazard, the solution to your problem and mine, okay, is the spiritual solution, vital spiritual experience. All of my problems can be solved with spiritual solutions. All of my problems are in the third dimension, and all of my solutions are in the fourth dimension. Okay, I have come to believe that. Okay, so how do we get to the fourth dimension? How did Bill Wilson get rocketed? Okay, he didn't just sit there on his bed and wish for things to get better and hope that he could stop drinking and get rocketed into this fourth dimension. And that didn't work for me either. And I'll tell you another thing, just going to AA meetings for me did not rocket me into this fourth. Just going to AA meetings and wishing for things to get better is not recovery from alcoholism. Okay, we have a program of action. It is a 12-step program of action. They are a set of spiritual actions that I can take to allow me to achieve that solution so I can overcome that problem. And tonight, primarily, we're going to read through the first half of Bill's story. And we're going to read through Bill's story right up until the point where his problem kind of becomes the very, very worst. And he's at kind of the jumping off point. And then we're going to see next week how this solution and the program of action comes into Bill's life. But tonight, for the most part, what we're going to do, first of all, as I said, we're going to go through the cycle. We're going to share a couple of our own stories. Then we're going to get into Bill's story. We're going to read through the first half of Bill's story, and we're going to see, where does this cycle of alcoholism, where does this grave nature of alcoholism, this physical allergy, mental obsession fueled by this spiritual sickness, how does this impact and affect this man, our co-founder named Bill Wilson? Okay. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to start sharing the cycle. Okay, and as you guys may remember, where do we get this cycle from? We get this cycle from the doctor's opinion. In particular, where in that chapter? Page XXVIII, Roman numeral 28. The bottom of that page, it says men and women drink, essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Okay, and I pointed out that it says men and women there, but what Dr. Silkworth is really referring to there are not normal men and women. He's referring to alcoholics. Okay, in fact, let's go to that page. And Brad, my man, is here to be our reader tonight. Brad, do you want to read that paragraph for us? And I want everyone to kind of read through that paragraph and simultaneously kind of look on this cycle and see where we're at from. But let's get it right from the book. Men and women drink.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Soloton, a recovered alcoholic. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again.
Sometimes we do emerge resourceful, don't we? When we're trying to get more of our medicine, so to speak. Yeah, emerging resourceful. That's funny. Back to you, Brad.
This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery.
Thank you very much, Brad. And so we've talked about this a lot, but you know, when Dr. Silkworth is referring to a psychic change, guys, what we are referring to, we are not looking for a psychic change in Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, that's what a medical doctor is using to kind of make himself more comfortable with this phenomenon that he's seeing go on with these alcoholics. But what an alcoholic of my type needs is not a psychic change. That's just what Dr. Silkworth is calling it, a medical doctor, a scientist. Okay, what I need is a spiritual awakening. I need to develop a relationship with a power greater than myself. Okay, that today I'm comfortable today calling God. Okay, our solution in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not about moral psychology, it's not psychic change. Those are things that Dr. Silkworth talks about. He is not an alcoholic. An alcoholic of my type, I need a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. Frankly, I needed to develop a relationship with God. Okay. And how do we do that? We do that through a program of action. Okay. Program of action to connect to this solution to overcome the problem. Okay. So one of the things that I just wanted to point out, you know, there's this line, his alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And we read that and we think it means when we're drinking, you know, I think that the way that I drink is normal, right? And there, yeah, of course, there's truth to that. But I think it also has to do with when I get sober, when I enter that period of sobriety and I become spiritually sick and I become restless, irritable, and discontent, I also will fall victim to the belief that that is a normal way of living and that that is as good as life is ever going to get for me in sobriety. And I believe that lie. And I think this is too painful and I'm going to get loaded again. Okay. And I'm going to reach out for the only thing I've ever known that's going to give me that sense of ease and comfort. I'm going to take that first drink. Okay. Bill Wilson calls it the desperate experiment. Why does an alcoholic attempt over and over the desperate experiment of the first drink? It's because sobriety is killing me, because I can't stand the way I feel when I'm sober. Okay. That's the unmanageability of alcoholism, the way that I feel and the way that I think. Okay. And the way that I feel impacts the way that I think, and the way that I think about the way that I feel. The way that I think about the way that I'm feeling, usually about the way that I'm feeling. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's crazy. Okay. And I'm sitting there and I'm telling myself I'm sober, and I'm telling myself this is the only normal way of life. I'm here to tell you, if you're new and you're in that period of sobriety, the most difficult period of sobriety, when we've taken the medicine away, but the spiritual awakening has not happened yet, and you are still feeling restless, irritable, and discontent, and you are still feeling this spiritual malady, and you think to yourself, well, I could stay sober if I could just have what those people on that big book study had. They all seem pretty happy, joyous, and free, and I'm thinking about committing suicide because I'm in so much pain, and the only thing I've ever known is to take a drink. I'm here to tell you that is not the only normal way of life. I'm here to tell you that the way you feel is not a normal way of life. The way that you're feeling right now, I promise you, can get better. We can get you out of that. Alcoholics Anonymous offers me a solution not for drinking. Alcoholics Anonymous offers me a solution for the disease of alcoholism. And alcoholism is a disease that continues on when I'm drinking and when I am not drinking. In fact, Bob Darrell, well-known AA speaker, says alcoholism is a disease that begins when I stop drinking. Okay, and I understand that. And we talk about this word relapse and we think, oh, he started drinking. That's the beginning of the relapse. That's not the beginning of the relapse. I've been taught that's the end of the relapse. The relapse is the slow erosion of all of the actions that I had been taking in my sobriety that were keeping me sober, little by little by little, tearing down that brick wall of a spiritual defense between me and the first drink. Okay, one brick at a time, and it's miserable. It's miserable ripping that wall down until eventually, inevitably, I drink again. Okay. So all of that said, guys, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I'm here to tell you, if you're sober and you are not enjoying your life and you are not enjoying the way that you feel and you are feeling restless, irritable, and discontent, and you understand that spiritual sickness, resentment, fear, depression, guilt, shame, rage, all of that good stuff, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to feel that way. We have a way out of those types of feelings, and we have a program of action to connect us to a spiritual solution that will change me. Okay, it changes me. It changed my personality. It changed my character. It changed who I am fundamentally. And when I changed that, when I found a way to be ease and to feel ease and comfort sober, I no longer had to drink. Chuck Chamberlain says the reason I'm an alcoholic who's not drinking today is because I found in AA what I was always looking for in the bottle. Okay. So that said, guys, I will. I'll share a cycle story tonight, and then we'll see. We'll see if we have any volunteers. Okay, we'll take a show of hands and see if there's anyone who feels eager to jump in and tell one of their cycle stories tonight. Let me think of one. Have I told the story about when I went out drinking right before I took a university exam? Have I told that story lately? You guys heard me tell that one? I can't see. Brad, what do you think? Should I tell that one?
That's a
Have I
good
told-
one. That's
Have I
always a
told
good
that
one.
recently? Okay, so I was in university. Now I knew that I was not a good drinker. I mean, I knew when I started drinking when I was 12 years old, I knew I did not drink like a normal 12-year-old. Okay. I knew I was having trouble right away. And I was about 19 years old and I was in university, and I had made a lot of firm resolutions by that point that I was going to control my drinking and that I was really going to smarten up and I was going to, stop drinking and just do drugs. And then it was the next week, it'd be, no, I'm going to stop doing drugs and I'm just going to drink. And I'd made lots of firm resolutions. Okay. But I was in university and it was the night before this big exam that I had, and I was studying and I was nervous. I was anxious about the exam, and I was filled with spiritual sickness. I mean, I was born with this spiritual sickness. So there's always depression, there's always fear haunting me, and I'm feeling anxiety about this exam and so on. And I had a thought. Okay. I had a thought. I didn't have a drink. I had a thought. And the thought was, I seem to remember a university professor telling me one time, the night before an exam, it's not good to study too much. Okay. The best thing to do is to go take a break. Okay. To go watch a movie or go for a walk. Or the thought that I had was, I'm going to go to the bar. I'm just going to have one drink. No more than two. No more than two. Okay. And so I went to the bar and I had that first drink. Okay. And I ordered a beer, and it was a schooner. You guys know what schooners are? You have schooners in the United States. Okay. Like one. Okay. But that's one. That was one drink, right? That's one. You might as well, if you're going to, and I drank that schooner and it kicked off, man. And I triggered that physical allergy horribly. And that night, next thing I knew, I was drinking shots of tequila with my new best friend because he was buying, and that was it, man. And the next morning, like I came to in the, it was winter time, and I came to, and I was late for the exam, and I was driving in my car, and I'll never forget driving to that exam, and I'm late for that exam, and it was like -25 in the middle of winter, and I'm driving this little beat up old car, and I'm punching myself in the head, literally baffled and punching myself in the head, literally physically hitting myself in the head, saying, never, never, never again, never again. I'm never going to drink again. Okay. Never. That was my firm resolution at that moment. And of course, to go again around the cycle, that spiritual sickness, then I felt so ashamed of what I'd done, and I wrote the exam and it went fine, but I was really embarrassed and mad at myself. And I don't know about you guys, but when I'm embarrassed and I'm mad at myself, it's pretty typical of what a guy like me is going to do. And the next thing I knew, like later that day, even though hours earlier I'd been punching myself in the head saying never, ever again, some friends of mine came by and said, Kevin, we're going to go to the Rattler's Den, which is what the bar at the university was called. We're going to have some drinks. Do you want to go? And I had no mental defense whatsoever. And I went and I took those drinks and I kept going. And that was it. Okay. So that's an example. That's one of my cycle stories. I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay. And do we have any volunteers? Do we have anyone online who would like to share a cycle story? Anyone who's just feeling like giving it a shot? All you gotta do is just start. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I can share one.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I'm Paul, alcoholic from New York. I live in Boston now. Yeah, 1986, I'm 24, got a father in AA and never came to AA. I was living by myself in White Plains, New York. And I went to a wedding on a Sunday in White Plains. I drove down to New Rochelle with my van. I parked at New Rochelle by 95 right outside the Bronx. Went and saw my cousins. We went to the wedding somewhere by the Hudson River. And then, so Sunday morning, I wake up in White Plains, New York. And I'm hungover like hell. And I get on a bus. And I take the bus back to New Rochelle, which is like a 25-minute bus ride. I get to New Rochelle and I go down to get my van and it's gone. So I call the police. Van's stolen. And I go up to see my aunt. She lives like on the 8th floor of an apartment. And she said the words that changed my life. She said, "Well, you look pretty good when you got here last night." And I was like, oh boy. And I learned one thing, that you don't hang around with people who know more about where you've been than you do. So you get out. I got back on the bus, took that 20-minute ride back to White Plains, New York. And I lived in an apartment house, and 2 blocks away was my bar, the Shamrock. And I walked over to the Shamrock, and behind the Shamrock was my van. It was 2 blocks from my house, and I went and I had to stop drinking. I could not predict what was going to happen when I drank. Especially when it was free, because I was still trying not to come to AA. I was trying so hard not to come to AA. My dad was in AA for years, and 2 things happened. And I always say this. I don't care if it's my experience. When I picked up that phone to call my father, and I had never been to rehab, never been to detox, I knew that if I was to pick up that phone and touch the power of AA, that I had to stop drinking forever. And I didn't want to be broke. I think I always like to add that one in there because there was money problems in the house. But I didn't know if I could stay sober forever. I get that. But I was willing at 24 years old in construction in New York to stop drinking. And Dr. Bob says that in his story too. You got to be ready for good and all. I think we pass over that a little bit sometimes. And then we got to live one day at a time from then on. You know the deal. But that thought, I freaked out at a meeting the other day in Plymouth, and I'll drink tomorrow. And another sober, what the? I want to. I was gonna throw a chair across the room. Why would you even say that? You know what I mean? But anyway, that's just me. And I know it's a little trick that people use not to drink today.
No, it's okay. It's okay, Paul. I'm with you 100%. I talk about that in this study. Okay.
Yeah.
Our book says if we were going to stop drinking, there can be no lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. Okay. We don't
Amen.
drink.
Amen.
I had to be able to get my arms around that. These little tricks of like, just for today, I don't drink. Our book says we have no effective mental defense against the first drink. We're not going to be able to do that. So I'm with you 100%, Paul. Good. Well, I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing. And Scotty, I see your hand raised. Okay, so again, what we're looking for is the time that you swore off. What happened during the period of sobriety? How did you feel during that period of sobriety? What was the insane thought? What happened when you picked up the drink? Well, we know what happened when you picked up the drink, and then the rest kicked off. What we're really looking for, the key here, guys, is the swearing off, the spiritual sickness in between, becoming restless, irritable, and discontent. And then I wanted to pinpoint what exactly was the insane thought. And sometimes the insane thought was just, screw it, I'm going to get drunk. Okay, and we'll talk about that later. But what was exactly the thought that I had? Okay, over to you, Scott.
Right, so one morning I'm sitting in a hospital in Essex, England, again. Pancreatitis, again. I've got my family all around me. I've got my wife crying next to me, and I'm looking at it, and I'm so remorseful, and I'm sick to death of what I'm doing to myself, of what I'm doing to them, and everything else. And she's going, "Can you just please stop this?" And I'm going, and I sat there, and I was going, like, with all my heart and all my soul, I don't want to do this, and I don't intend to do this again, and I'm not going to do this again, and I promise you. And I felt so mangled up inside. The only thing that was going to take away this remorse, this regret, this everything was have a drink. but I got tubes hanging out of me and everything. So I was literally looking for an excuse or an option to get out of that room, even though I'm in a ward. As everyone parted and everyone, because the drama all come down, my mum went that way, my sister went that way, my wife was now talking to a doctor, and I was already making plans how I was going to get out. I'd had my suddenly. And then when she went home, she went that way in a taxi, and I went in a taxi that way. We left two different ways, and I went to a pub. And I went to a pub in my pajamas, or the gown, and the woman looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" And I just turned around and said, "Just give me a beer." And I had two or three beers with the intention of going back, having a chewing gum, and going back to bed. Right, that was the main. I've been in hospital gown, and I've got every idea of just having a couple of beers. That'll be it, and I'll go back to the hospital bed, and I'll be all right. And I'll take my meds, and I end
There
up
it is.
staying there all.
Thought. There's the insane thought, right?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have a couple and a piece of chewing gum, and I'm gonna go back to bed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Any
well, I
one
mean,
of
well, I
us
mean, the
sitting
whole-
there, if we were sitting beside Scott in that bar, what would we say? What are you, insane?
There's a guy here with a hospital gown and blood on his face where he's pulled a tube out of his face and he's sitting there saying, "I'm only going to have a couple." And obviously the couple became a couple more, and then they wouldn't take me back in the hospital because I was too drunk, and we were off again.
And all that they can say is he must be insane. Strong
Yeah.
language, but isn't it true? Isn't it true? With respect to the first drink, most of us have been strangely insane. That's a brilliant story, Scott. That's it, man. That's it right there. Out of the hospital, insane thought, unable to recall with sufficient force, regardless of the fact that he's still wearing the hospital gown. Unable to
mean,
recall with force the memory.
I've got a degree in statistical analysis and maths. I'm very logical, but this isn't.
Probability is not good, Scott. The probability is not good. Statistically speaking, you're fucked. Okay. Well, I think that's good, guys. I think that's good. I think we nailed it home. Guys, let's go to Bill's story. Let's hop into Bill's story, page 1 in the big book. Okay. And we talked about last week why the doctor's opinion is in the Roman numerals. It's because he's a non-alcoholic. He was non-alcoholic, and they wanted the book to only be written by real alcoholics. Okay. Dr. Soquith, not an alcoholic, and so they moved it into the Roman numerals. And so everything in the first 164 pages, starting with page 1 to page 164, is all written by alcoholics. Okay. The first 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. So right now we are going to read Bill's story. This is the story of our co-founder, Bill Wilson. Okay. Bill Wilson is the man that we read, we've spoken about a lot. He's the man that was in the hospital, in the town's hospital with Dr. Soquith. Bill Wilson got sober December 11th, 1934. And when Ebby Thatcher comes to the town's hospital and takes him through the program of action, Bill Wilson has an experience, and we're going to read about it in the book, in this story. It'll actually be next week that we'll read about it. But for now, what we want to do is we want to read through Bill's story, and we're going to see, where does he swear off, become spiritually sick, have an insane thought, and start drinking again. We're going to see where our co-founder, a guy who has this problem, we're going to see Bill go through the cycle 3 different times in the first part of this book. Okay. One of the other things that I think I have a duty and an obligation to do in Bill's story in particular, and several other chapters, is to provide some historical context on exactly what it is he's talking about here. Okay. Because they write in a particular older language from the 1930s. It's a particular vernacular. There's a lot of historical references that the first time I read this book, I just got confused. And when an alcoholic of my type gets confused, I get angry. And when I get angry, I quit. Okay, that's how I live, man. And so the first time I read this book, it made no sense to me. I was in the psych ward at the time. I'm trying to read about this guy, Bill Wilson. I had no idea who this cat was or what it had to do with the fact that I had seriously just tried to commit suicide and ended up in the hospital. I had no idea, and I just threw this book away. Made no sense. I'm here to tell you that if you'll stick with me, you'll stick with us. I'm going to try to fill in some of the blanks and connect some of the dots here, brothers and sisters, and I promise you that although he may have been a New York stock speculator, a night school lawyer from New York and Manhattan in the 1930s, and we may think that I have nothing in common with this guy, I promise you, if I look for the similarities and stop looking for the differences, I'm going to understand that I identify with this guy exactly. And it turns out that this chapter now is one of my all-time favorites. I love this. I love this story. You're probably going to hear me say that about just about every chapter in the big book. But this chapter, for tonight, for right now, this chapter is my all-time favorite. So, with that said, chapter 1, page 1, Bill's story. Over to you, Brad. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Chapter 1, Bill's story. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor.
Okay, so let's pause there, because if you're like me already, I'm confused and angry. Okay, what is a Plattsburgh? Okay, what's a Plattsburgh? I've heard of a platypus, but what's a Plattsburgh? I don't know. What the heck? Okay, so first of all, what war are they talking about? Okay, Bill Wilson's talking about a war. What war? Anybody? What war is Bill Wilson talking about? World War I. Okay, so look, here's the deal. Most times when AA speakers, if you go to a conference and you'll hear an AA speaker, they all have a particular place where they like to just begin their story. They all start them in different places. Some guys will say, they'll start, I was born on a cold, rainy night in, whatever. And they start from the day they were born and they talk about their family of origin or whatever. I've heard some guys that start the first AA meeting I went to and they'll do that and then they go backwards and then it's kind of like, they fill in the blanks or fill in the dots. What Bill Wilson is doing here is he's starting his story when he's about 19, 20 years old. And it's really the story of his first drink, okay? When he first discovered alcohol. And he first discovered alcohol when he was a soldier in World War I. So he and his friends were from a place called Plattsburgh, New York. Plattsburgh is a city in New York, okay? And what he's talking about is that they had gone to New England to boot camp, okay? And he is learning to become a soldier. And there was a lot of heroics and valor all around World War I. And so he felt like a hero and he discovered liquor, okay? So that's what that first paragraph is talking about. War fever is just, all he's saying is, I was a soldier in World War I. When I went to boot camp, the people of that small town really made us feel like heroes, and I discovered liquor. That's all he's saying. Okay? Back to you, Brad.
I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol.
All right, so Bill Wilson's grandfather, I believe his name was Griffith Wilson. I think Bill Wilson's middle name was named after his grandfather. Is that right, Rob?
His grandfather's name was Fayette.
Fayette. Okay, Fayette was the alcoholic. His grandfather was an alcoholic. And there was a lot of warnings to Bill Wilson from his people about, hey, you've got a lot of bad drinkers in your family. You need to be careful. I got the same warnings. There's a lot of bad drinkers in my family, okay? Anyone else get that warning when you were younger? Because there were bad drinkers in your family and people said, you need to be careful about how much you drink. I see Benjamin got his hand up, right? Yeah, okay, that's all Bill Wilson's saying. So now he says, in time, we sailed for over there. What's he talking about? He's saying we sailed to Europe. Okay, Europe, where World War I was. That was called Over There, and there was a famous song called Over There, Over There. Okay, that's what he's talking about. We sailed for over there. And look at this. Already in the first paragraph, Bill Wilson is already restless, irritable, and discontent, and is already using alcohol to make himself feel better. I was very lonely, and again turned to alcohol. We're not even through the first paragraph. Okay. Back to you, Brad.
We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot whether he dieth by musket or by pot.
All right, so Bill Wilson, they've sailed to Europe. He's in England. They go to Winchester Cathedral. What he's basically saying is there's a tombstone, okay, a doggerel or a tombstone outside in this guy's grave, and what it basically says is this soldier drank himself to death. This soldier was not killed in battle. This soldier drank himself to death. Okay, that's what that little poem says. When it says, whether he dieth by musket or by pot, they're talking about potted beer. Okay, and I think the story was this guy drank some potted beer that was fermented, but it hadn't fermented enough, and it expanded in his stomach, and it killed him. Okay, terrible, terrible. So what Bill Wilson is saying is, hey, I'm a soldier and I'm about to drink myself to death too. Okay, he's foreshadowing, if you will, saying ominous warning, which I failed to heed. That's really all of that story means. And what's interesting is that there's an AA conference every year in England at Winchester Cathedral. And any one of us could attend it. They have it every year, and it's related to this story in the book. Okay, back to you, Brad.
Ominous warning. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance.
Okay, so what we see here is what Bill Wilson later referred to in his writings as power drives. He would get these terrible power drives where he needed to prove to the world that he was important. Okay, and we see on the next page, on page 2, if you go there, Brad, I'll just read it for us. He says, I took a night law course and obtained deployment as an investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I would prove to the world I was important. Okay, why does an alcoholic need to prove to the world that we're important? Why do I need that validation from the world? Because most alcoholics feel like we're nothing inside. We feel empty inside and we feel worthless, and most of us hate ourselves. And so what do? We combat it the other way. We come across the other way. Okay, and we look like these huge confident egomaniac, self-centered, power hungry people that want to prove to the world that we're okay. Why? Because we know inside we're not okay. You know, great AA speaker Johnny Harris says, you know, I knew in myself I was nothing, and I would take a drink and I would feel like an almost. And when you feel like nothing, becoming an almost is top of the world. Okay, so that's what Bill Wilson is experiencing here, and this is his ego and these power drives starting to come out. Back to you, Brad.
My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long walks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived.
Any other drunk geniuses here? Any other drunk geniuses? Oh, I was a drunk genius. Oh, drunk genius. And the more drugs I would do, the more genius I became too. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I wanted to become Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison from The Doors, or Kurt Cobain. Like, I thought I was, you know, a tortured, you know, artist and all that stuff. Oh man, I was a drunk genius. Just like Bill Wilson, right? And when I look for the similarities, I'll start to see more of them. Back to you, Brad.
By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business.
All right, so a maelstrom is just like a funnel or a tornado, okay? And really, they're talking about the stock exchange right now. This is the first time in the 1920s. Anyone here ever heard of the Roaring 20s? You ever hear of that before? Okay, in the 1920s, the economy in the United States was taken off like a rocket. Like Bill Wilson says, many people lost money, but some got very rich. Why not I? Okay, and so he's talking about this cyclone that's going to sweep him up into Wall Street, and he's going to make all this money, and everything's going to be great. What could possibly go wrong?
Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on.
Okay, so Bill Wilson in the 1920s. So first of all, he talks about this boomerangs that's going to spin around and cut them into ribbons, right? And so what he's saying is this alloy, which is a mixture of two metals. Okay, when you melt two metals together, you create an alloy. And so he's talking about an alloy of drinking and speculation, which just means investing in stock. Okay, if I'm convinced if Bill Wilson was around today, he would be a crypto dude. He would be investing in Bitcoin. Okay, and drinking and investing in Bitcoin and drinking. I guarantee you he would be a crypto dude, and he'd be trying to talk you into buying his Dogecoin or whatever it is. He would be that guy. Okay, alcoholic crypto dude. And so this is what he's doing. And what he's saying is what seemed like a really good idea at a time, and it looks like it's going to work for a while, spun on him and is going to cut him into ribbons. Most alcoholics have at least a period of time in their lives where we're holding it together and it actually looks like we're doing pretty well, right up until the point that the bottom just falls out and everything gets destroyed. And that's what's going to happen to Bill Wilson. He says that he and his wife have saved $1,000. If you account for inflation today, that's about $14,000, just to give you some perspective of how much money they had. Okay. And they invested that into some securities. When you talk about securities, for anyone who doesn't know, they're just investing in the stock market. That's what that means. They're called securities when you do that. And Bill Wilson had developed an idea. At this point, all the investments going on in New York City, but they have no idea what's actually happening in all these factories in Ohio and in Pittsburgh and all over, the Eastern United States. Nobody really knows what's going on there. There's speculation. That's why they're called speculators. They're speculating on these businesses and what's going on, but no one really had any idea. Bill Wilson had this thought, hey, I'm going to get, my wife and I are going to go out and investigate and see what's actually going on in these factories, and I'll report back to you about what's going on. And Bill Wilson is saying he couldn't convince any of his friends to invest in this idea. And so he's going to do it himself. He's got that power drive. He's going to prove to them this is a good idea, one way or the other. I think a lot of those guys didn't want to know. We don't want to know what's actually happening in those factories because we're making a lot of money here, Wilson. So why don't you just leave it alone? But Bill Wilson's going to go out and do this anyway. So back to you, Brad.
We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success in speculation.
Just means that they should. Our friends thought we were crazy. Lunacy commission. Our friends thought we were crazy. Maybe they were right.
I had had some success at speculation, so we had a little money. But we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year.
So when he says the exercise of an option, it just means that he sold some shares. He sold some of the stock that he had. That's all that means. When they talk about options or securities, it's the same thing. He invested in some companies, he sold those shares, and he made some money.
For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends.
Okay, if anybody's seen The Great Gatsby, that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, like that's what I envision here. Okay, that's who he is. He's like this dude, man. He had arrived. He had it going on, and some of us, it looks that way for a little while. Okay, it looks like we've got it all together, and we're gonna see that outward appearances are rarely inward reality.
My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friend terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes.
All right, so I want to point something out here. I want to point the language that Bill Wilson is using and how we can identify with him, okay? So he says, the remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row and I became a lone wolf. You know, you hear that, it's like, what do you, like, is that even English? What are you saying? Okay? The remonstrances of his friends. His friends said, Bill Wilson, we don't want to be around you anymore when you're drinking. Okay? You're kind of a donkey when you drink, and you're a liability. And we don't like being around you. Okay? And so that terminated in a row. So which means a fight. A row is a fight. So his friend said, Bill, we think you're drinking too much. He said, get screwed when they told him that. And so he became a lone wolf, which means he started drinking by himself. Now, if I told you that that's what he was actually saying there, that his friends told him he was drinking too much, he told them to mind their own business and he went and started drinking by himself. Anybody here identify with Bill Wilson? Yeah, exactly. Okay, back to you, Brad.
In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen.
Okay, so what I want to point out here, I love this, okay? He's talking about to overtake Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen was a golfer, famous golfer, so think Tiger Woods, okay? And Bill Wilson is, I'm just like him, man, okay? I'm just like him. If I'm going to start golfing, okay, I can't just go enjoy a day of golf. I can't just become an average golfer. If I'm going to start golfing, I need to be not only as good as the greatest golfer in the world, I need to overtake him, okay? I can't do anything a little bit. I can't just be okay at anything. Why do I always have this desire that I'm either going to be the best at something or else I quit, I don't care, I'm not doing any of it. Get screwed, I'm done, I don't want to try, I give up, right? Why can't, alcoholism thrives in those extremes. 100 miles an hour or quit, okay? I knew someone who was, I think this is so funny, she was a drug addict. She was doing like tons of drugs, but she was also running triathlons at the same time, okay? Like we can't just go for a run around the block. We're gonna like do triathlons, it's insane. It's totally insane. Okay, but that's how we are. If he's gonna go golfing, he's got to overtake Walter Hagen. If I'm gonna learn to play guitar, I've got to be Eddie Van Halen by next week or I quit. Okay, alcoholism lives in those extremes, and I believe that God gives us peace to be able to just start to live and breathe and be okay with who we are, just right in the middle, and that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, I embrace being average these days, okay? Sometimes. All right, back to you, Brad.
Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to caroom around the exclusive course, which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ 32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends.
Okay, so obviously this is the great stock market crash that precedes the Great Depression of the 1930s. Some of you probably know about this. I've read about it in the past. That boomerang that Bill was talking about, that sucker just started spinning back towards him right now. You better believe that. All right? And he's going to get shredded. So back to you, Brad.
The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back.
So twice now in this story, we're going to see 2 times where Bill Wilson was contemplating suicide, but doesn't do it because he has a different solution. Okay. And alcoholics are, you know, we talk about suicide a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. We are people, that is the ultimate sacrifice for many of us. And most alcoholics that die by suicide when they're sober, not when they're drinking. Okay, that's the truth. Bill Wilson doesn't have to jump like those other guys do. Why? Because he's going to the bar. Okay, and we'll see another place where Bill Wilson doesn't commit suicide because he can find ease and comfort in a drink that normal people can't feel. Okay, the effect of alcohol on us, the sense of ease and comfort that we get, does not happen to normal people. And we're going to see Bill Wilson in two places turn from having to die by suicide by going to find solace in taking a drink. Okay, back to you, Brad.
Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke.
The part about Napoleon is he was expelled from France by the royalty there, and then he came back, and he was a big hero when he came back the first time. Then it happened a second time. He was exiled, and he went to a place called St. Helena, which was a very, very bad place. Returning from Elba, he came back. He was a great hero. Okay, so that's really what that story is talking about.
We went to live with my wife's parents. I found a job, then lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver.
Okay, so first of all, having to move in with your wife's parents is never a good indication of success in life, typically. Okay, there's of course external circumstances, and maybe health reasons or stuff like that, but we're starting to see Bill and Lois really falling apart. Now, he had a job and then he lost it because he's drunkenly crazy fighting with a taxi driver. He's totally starting to unravel. Okay, back to you, Brad.
Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places.
Anyone here ever felt that you would become an unwelcome hanger-on with friends and acquaintances and drinking buddies and all that stuff? I know I felt like an unwelcome hanger-on for many, many times in my life, man.
Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3, got to be routine.
So they're talking about bathtub gin here because this is also the era of prohibition. So there weren't liquor stores. You couldn't go to a liquor store. You had to go to a bootlegger. And so they're talking about gin that was literally made in people's bathtubs. That's how you got alcohol. Okay. So that's what they mean when they're talking about bathtub gin. This is Prohibition era United States. Prohibition is going to last until 1933. 1933, Prohibition ends in the United States. So at this point, they're still drinking gin out of bathtubs.
Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope.
Okay, so he's given that firm resolution. I can control this. Okay, firm resolution, I can control it, but we're going to see what's going to happen.
Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished.
He took that drink, and the drink took him, and he destroyed this business opportunity. Now we're going to see Bill Wilson make this genuine, firm resolution. Okay, just like in the cycle, he's going to give this firm resolution.
I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I'd written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did.
He was through forever. Lois, I've learned my lesson. It'll never happen again, okay? And what happens?
Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been
Uh-oh.
there had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that.
Okay, so that's a pretty good definition of insanity, of the alcoholic insanity. An appalling lack of perspective is what Bill Wilson calls it. An appalling lack of perspective.
Renewing my resolve, I tried again.
Firm resolution, right there again.
Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened.
Okay, so he goes into the bar to use the telephone. Does he have a drink? Not right away. Something else has to happen before he has the drink. What did he have? He had a thought. Okay, and it doesn't detail exactly what the insane thought is, but I want you guys to understand, in between his firm resolution that he's never going to drink again, then he starts to get cocky about it. Okay, he starts to become overconfident. He goes into this bar, he has a thought, picks up the drink, and in no time he's beating his head on the bar, asking himself how it happened.
As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion.
Again, we see Bill Wilson turning from suicide by taking a drink, okay? And we really see him falling apart right now in terrible ways, and we'll see him go through the cycle at least one more time.
The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity, so did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics.
Okay, so that's the Towns Hospital, and that's where Bill Wilson meets Dr. Soakworth.
Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally.
Okay, so he's saying Dr. Soakworth in the hospital is teaching him physically and mentally that he is ill. Physical allergy, mental obsession, the insane drink that precedes the first drink, the insane thought that precedes the first drink.
It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge.
Okay, so guys, this is so key, and I really want to highlight this. What he's saying here is that he went and he has learned the cycle. He's learned the cycle of alcoholism, and he knows the cycle. And I see so many times people come to this study and they learn that cycle and they think, my God, that's me. I get it. and they think that they have learned a solution. Knowing that cycle is not a solution to alcoholism. Our solution, we've got 11 more steps to go, brothers and sisters. Okay. Our solution is a 12-step solution, not a one-step solution. We've got a 12-step solution. Okay. Spiritual actions that get me connected to what our real solution is, which is spirituality. What Bill Wilson is saying here is something that a lot of people fall victim to a belief in this study. And I've seen it, I've been doing this study for 15 years. And I've seen a lot of people come here, they learn that cycle, they think, now I've got it. Surely this was it. I've learned this cycle, self-knowledge, that will fix it. Things are starting to get better, starting to work, make a little money, just like Bill Wilson does here. Okay, exactly the same. I'm here to tell you, brothers and sisters, knowing that cycle is not enough. Knowing that cycle is not the same thing as achieving a spiritual solution to the cycle. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay, that's exactly what's happening to Bill Wilson here. Okay, back to you, Brad, and hang with us, guys. Just another 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll pause for the night here on page 8.
But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining morale and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacities to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought, my poor wife, there had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master.
Okay, so some people will say that's where Bill Wilson takes step 1. Okay. Now he's going to drink again from there, but when people really outline where the steps are happening in the book, some people will say that's where Bill Wilson takes step 1.
Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious first drink, and on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone.
One of the things I look at here, okay, he talks about the insidious insanity of the first drink. That means that he falls victim to the belief that he can drink, it's going to be okay. He's going to take that first drink, and he has an insane thought, picks up the drink. And it's Armistice Day 1934, which is November 11th. We have Remembrance Day in Canada. They called it Armistice Day back then. So what do you think a guy who had been to World War I, who had fought in that war, what do you think is happening to him on Armistice Day? I'm willing to bet he's sitting around feeling a lot of self-pity and a lot of horrible, terrible memories of what he saw in the war. Okay. And that is his spiritual sickness. That's exactly what's going on. And he has the insidious insanity. And he says, man, I just, if what happened to me in war happened to you, you would drink too, whatever it is, right? Whatever trivial excuse it is. So that's what I think is going on there, if I had to guess.
Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the 4th dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes.
Booyah! All right, we're going to pause there, guys. We're going to pause right there at the 4th dimension. What better place to stop at the 4th dimension big book study than right then and there? And brothers and sisters, I'm so excited. Next week, everything changes. Everything changes next week in the next paragraph. Okay? Our solution and a program of action comes to visit Bill Wilson in his kitchen, and your life and mine changes forever. Okay, it's one of the most pivotal moments in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's one of the most pivotal moments in the history of mankind. Certainly one of the most pivotal moments in my life, because if this moment doesn't happen, I get to live a life today that I should not have. I should not have the life that I have today. A guy like me, I should be in jail, should be in an institution locked up somewhere or dead. Okay. My grand sponsor, Clancy, prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, I mean, he was committed to the Texas State Insane Asylum and was given the major series, which is 64 electric shock treatments, because that's what they used to do. That's how they used to treat alcoholism. If I had to choose between 64 electric shock treatments or just doing a step 5 with my sponsor, making some amends, doing a little prayer and meditation and going and be of service to someone else, I know what my choice is going to be. Okay. And that solution is going to walk into Bill Wilson's kitchen next week when Ebby Thatcher comes to visit him. So